Hello all, welcome. We're just going to wait a few seconds, about 30 seconds before we begin, let people file in. All right, so I think we can get started. Welcome to everyone, and I just want to start by thanking everyone for joining us today. We are really happy to be here, and we are excited to be discussing and showing you all some of the work that we've been excited about recently. I am Joe Palmisano, Associate Director of Data Management at BEDAC, the Biostatistics and Epidemiology Data Analytics Center here at Boston University School of Public Health. I'm the co-leader of the Data Core. I work with Yorgos Tripodis, Professor of Biostatistics in the Department of Biostatistics, also at the School of Public Health. And together we manage the Data Core here at the BU ADRC. The Data Core is made up of a bunch of folks, a bunch of wonderful, talented, experienced people here at BEDAC and the Department of Biostatistics at the School of Public Health. Folks that have particular expertise in system design and development, programming, and providing analytic support for all of the work that's done here at the BU ADRC. We together have been supporting, as the Data Core, the BU ADRC for the past 25 plus years. And in that time, we've seen many changes to the way data is managed, the software that's used typically, the systems that are used, the way people work with data, the way people consume and interact with data. And in that time, we have done a lot of work to update our processes, our systems, the ways that we work with data to make things work efficiently for all the folks that we support and all the cores of the BU ADRC. Today, we're going to be talking about how we're currently leveraging PowerBI and dashboarding to introduce efficiencies in the way that we report data and the way that our investigators work with data. The things that we're going to be talking today about are really a collaboration between the folks in the Data Core here at the BU ADRC, but also a collaboration between the Executive Committee, in particular the Clinical Core, the Outreach and Recruitment Cores. And so we're going to be showing some examples of the things that we've been working on. With us today, we have Nate Surgenor, an application developer. He has been leading our efforts for dashboard integration in our BU ADRC systems. He's also been very instrumental here at our center in the establishment and the development of infrastructure for PowerBI report development and system integration. I'm going to kick things off to Nate in just a moment. First, I'll mention that, so I'll be moderating today. And we can make use of the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. So if folks have questions along the way, please feel free to add those there. We might address some of those in the Q&A section. We might discuss some of those along the way. And certainly at the end, we'll have time for Q&A and we can talk about some of those things and more then. So without further ado, Nate, take it away.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining. We'll be discussing today, as Joe, thanks for kicking it off, introduced maximizing analytical efficiency and customization with Power BI. So we'll showcase some examples that we've developed for our purposes at the BU ADRC, for our core and for other cores, and then we'll move into a broader discussion about how this increases efficiency in the department and for the end users as well, and how it takes some reporting burden, some working burden off of other programmers, developers, and statisticians. And then finally, we'll talk about some limitations that are unique to public health and medical research of Power BI. So as Joe mentioned, I'm an applications developer at BEDAC, which is, as Joe also mentioned, Biostatistics and Epidemiology Data Analytics Center at BU School of Public Health. I know it's a mouthful, but at the end of the day, we support research for SPH and BUMC with data management, reporting, systems, infrastructure, and analytics, and serve as a data coordinating center on a lot of projects for BUSPH and BUMC. My background is managerial economics from Bentley University, class of 2017. I have worked mainly in data management, database development, and reporting development in my 4 years since having graduated, I should say. Now, before I jump into one of our examples, I just want to give a little bit of a history of the systems at ADRC. Joe gave a little bit of an explanation of exactly what we are and who we work with, and a little bit about our purpose, but specific to our systems history, when you're established 25 years ago, a lot of things change. So in the beginning, we started with a lot of isolated systems that were developed to accommodate distinct functions of the ADC cores. Over time, however, we have grown to unify those systems and support them with more efficient, interactive, data-driven reporting. I would also add that to get to this place, we originally may have had certain data stored in a place which was specific to an individual core or an individual study for an individual investigator. Now we've really unified those, even if the data is maybe not in the same exact database. We've got everything in a lot more unified place and systems that work together rather than on their own. And so over time, we have developed REDCap systems, custom web systems that leverage Microsoft's .NET framework, as well as Microsoft 365 and Power Platform applications, which are what we'll be talking about today. Power BI is an example of that. So before taking you into a little bit more background on Power BI, I just want to show you exactly what Power BI is. So right now we're looking at Power BI in edit mode, so sort of the developer look at how you use Power BI, I should say. So I just note before going into anything, this data is publicly accessible COVID-19 data that's created and maintained by the Center for Civic Impact at Johns Hopkins University. This data is no affiliation with BU ADRC or with NACC, and it's really just used for the purposes to illustrate the functionality of Power BI and not to draw any conclusions on any of the data that's in here. And I just will add as well that I chose this data because I think it is contextual. Unfortunately, we all probably know a good amount about it. We've seen a lot of it over the years. And so it's a good example to start with because it's contextual for everybody. So before I jump into sort of what everything is on your screen here, I'll add that the data that's in here, whether it's COVID-19 data, whether it's data from your organization, the main piece of development is oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes going to be actually manipulating, transforming that data, whether it's an ETL process or whether it's data cleaning, whether it's a SAS program to work on the data. There are a lot of different ways that we have to work with the data before it even gets into Power BI. That helps you shape your data set and makes your life easier when you do develop in here. And as a result, when you have that clean data coming in, you're able to develop things a lot faster. These reports that can do a lot, you can really develop pretty quickly once you have your data in there, which I'll get to in just a second. So to start out with each report, you need data, as we just mentioned. So our data here is coming from coming from the Johns Hopkins University data set. Now I've used other tools to import that data as a flat file here. So normally we would have a SQL connection, or we might have a cloud database instance that we're connecting to live. But in the end, it's all going to display the same. You'll have your queries or your data sets, whether they're from a flat file data source or from a SQL data source over here. And you'll have the editor over here where you can interact with the data similar to how you would have in Excel. There's a little bit more functionality to it, and you can do a little bit more in terms of transformations, but you really don't have to do any coding in here. And so again, once you've got your clean data set in, if you need to make any additional calculations, transformations, changes of data types, anything like that, you can do that in here and save your changes to bring it back into the main editor here. So what are each of these little things that you see? They're called visualizations. The top one here is an ArcGIS map, which is a third-party plugin for Power BI. And the main reason I included that here is just to illustrate that there are third-party visualizations that Power BI works with that allow you to do some more things than just necessarily what the base functionality might be of visualizations. We have a date filter visualization here, which keeps your date filter right in the page rather than having it on a filter pane. We have just a card is what it's called, but it's really just displaying a count. So very simple there. We have a line graph here, and then we have two matrices down here. All of these visualizations come from the visualization pane over here. So I currently have this selected, so it's showing me that I have a matrix here. I can, if I were to start a new page, for example, and click to add one, I can add a new visual and start adding data to it as I need to. I'm not going to do that just yet. I'm going to actually show you how to make one of these visuals in just a second. But before that, I just want to show you exactly the functionality that you see in the end as the end user. So for this particular report, which is a pretty simple example, we have our map and we have what is really mainly the data that we're working with down here. I will note again, the publicly available COVID-19 data here is cumulative counts, and so it's not daily numbers. On both of these matrices, we're looking at cumulative numbers, which means that we're actually not taking summarized data, but we're just taking the cumulative counts as we see them straight from the data set, which is important, an important concept to keep in mind as we start filtering through these things. So I'll just take an example of using the map here to show what filtering on a specific county will do. So we're looking at Norfolk County here, which is the county, incidentally, I grew up in. Not the point, but if I click on that, then we see down here only Norfolk County is displaying. If I go over here to click on Worcester County, the same thing, filtering for Worcester County. But you'll also notice that this card changes and this line graph also changes. And that's because those are also showing data filtered on Worcester County. So that, as we hover over here, we can see total deaths, 2,466, which is equivalent to what the total deaths marked is here. So we selected just the one, and the rest of the visualizations filtered to get to the values that correspond with that selected county. If I deselect this, it'll go back to everything that to full scope. So the same applies to the date filter as well, focusing on the excuse me, the line graph here, you'll notice that I changed the slider, it changes the line graph, and it starts on the day that I select here. You'll also notice on these matrices that the month of September has dropped off. So that's obviously, again, because we filtered it out here. A very simple example, but again, just to illustrate the functionality of how filtering works on a page, and how the visualizations themselves actually interact together. And then one final example is that as we clicked on the county name up here, you can also click on a county name down here and it'll filter the rest. And it even only highlights this in the ArcGIS map here. So there's lots of different ways to achieve the same sort of thing with the slices in Power BI. Now, just to give you a quick developer's look at how this works, I'm just going to put together this visualization, this matrix here for you from scratch. So first I'll delete it. And then I'm going to add re-add a matrix from the visualization pane. So this you can do whenever you want, but I like to just start out making it the shape that I need it to be. Now, in the visualization pane, you notice up here, these are all the different visualizations that you can use. Then here is the fields pane or the data pane where you can start to drag and drop fields into your visualization. For us, what we care about at the column level is the county name. At the row level, we care about what day it is. And really, we don't care about year or quarter. So this is one nuance to it, which is kind of important. But the dates, in Power BI, they set up as a hierarchy. So sometimes you have to get rid of, like we just did, get rid of the year or the quarter there just to show the level of granularity that you want. And then finally, values, we're going to use the sum deaths, which again, it's a cumulative count. And now you'll notice we have sum totals down here that are summing counts that are really cumulative sums already. So we shouldn't be summing them. So to get rid of that, I go into the format pane here, and I go find the grand totals and subtotals. So where it says grand total here, it's actually just the formatting of it. The subtotals, we want to turn off. We really want to turn off both. So I'll start with turning off row subtotals. And then if you scroll down here, you'll notice there's a column subtotal as well, which I'll just get rid of because it's not necessarily relevant. Now we have pretty much the same thing that we were looking at before, but the one difference is the way things are summed. So we look up here and we see it's cumulative and it's counting up, which is just basically the number, add the daily count of deaths to the original count from the day before, and it's that cumulative count. So down here, we actually want to make sure that the deaths value is at its maximum, so that you're picking out what the maximum number is on that day and on that month, which tells you exactly what the current number is. And so now that we've done that, we can actually go in and we should be able to add our row subtotals again, and you'll see that the total is reflecting just what the total is for, or sorry, not what the total is for, sorry, what the grand total is over the time period, the full time period, the cumulative sum. And so you're able to shift from doing a sum, because this shouldn't be summed, to taking the maximum and getting your correct value. So there's lots of nuance to getting to showing and displaying the right values there. It's easy to put in, as we just showed, a visualization that might be showing the wrong value or inappropriately showing a value. And so you really have to know what your data set is, or know the data you're working with before you can properly develop these visuals. So it's easy to do, but it does take some thinking to make sure that it's done right. And so that's from a developer's perspective, sort of what we do and what we see when we're creating these. So now I'm just going to head back to our presentation, and we'll talk about on a sort of a high level, what are different types of reporting. Now, the different types of I've put them into 4 separate categories at least. There's tabular reporting, geospatial, statistical reporting, and interactive dashboard reporting. Now this is just my view on it, the 4 sort of functional types of reporting that I've worked with and have experience with, but fully understand that there's probably other realms of reporting that this does not apply to. But specific to sort of business intelligence and public health related reporting, these are the main functional types of reportings that we often work with. Now, tabular report would basically be sort of like you have in Excel. It's a grid format, it's a table or it's a matrix. It's relatively straightforward to interact with. Most users are pretty comfortable interacting with these kinds of reports, and they can be done in many different ways, whether it's SSRS, whether it's in .NET, PHP, Tableau, SAS, like you can continue on for a long time with ways you can make tabular reports. It's very it's the most popular type of report, I would say, and historically it's what most places use to power or to do most of their reporting, I should say. Then geospatial reporting is sort of like, I deliberately put the ArcGIS example in the demo, first example with the COVID data there before, mainly because I wanted to illustrate that you can use third-party apps or third-party visualizations as well, but also to show you a type of geospatial report. The COVID-19 Johns Hopkins University dashboard that probably most of us have seen by now. You know, when COVID was first hitting, that was what was shown on all the news agencies, online, and that is using ArcGIS. And so there's those types of reports as well, where you're looking at a landscape, or sorry, looking at a map, and overlaying data over that map, and that's really what the heart of geospatial reporting is. The next type is statistical reporting, which I think most people in this audience are probably most familiar with, often done with SAS or Stata or SPSS. Lots of different, again, this one's a pretty common one that you can use lots of different tools to create. And I think the main difference between that and tabular reporting is really there's a higher burden of quality, and there's also a higher burden, I will say, of how formal it needs to be. There's formatting requirements often that come with those, as you might be preparing it for a paper, for example. And so it needs to be in a certain format. And then finally, what we're mainly concerned with or talking about today, which is interactive or dashboard reporting. Some examples of this are PowerBI or PHP. I believe even Tableau, you can create interactive dashboard reports as well. More and more tools are coming out. Amazon and Google Cloud Platform have their own versions, so to speak, of what Power BI is to Microsoft. So this presentation is not to sell you on any product specifically, or to say that Power BI is the best one. It's more that the goal is to illustrate how we use it. And you could theoretically use a different platform to do the same thing, which is to increase efficiency and increase customization as a group and for our clients. So now let's just take a step back and think about what is Power BI. So I mentioned before what this word Power Platform Power Platform is really just a fancy, Microsoft's fancy word for these 4 applications that you see here, or for 4 programs. Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power Virtual Agents. Now, Power Virtual Agents is more working on debugging stuff, and you're working directly with Microsoft. I have not used this very much, but I can speak much more to these other 3, which are software as a service applications that are offered by Microsoft and allow clients to create full-scale applications, to create their own reporting infrastructure, to automate tasks, whether it's in their Office 365 tenant, in systems, on a local computer, on a server. It allows you to do a lot of different things. Again, today we're mainly focused on Power BI, which is the reporting software as a service offering. But the other tools can be also helpful in development. Power Apps is a tool that can be used to create a data entry application that it lives on your Power BI report. So imagine what we just looked at, but also having a way to enter data into it. And then Power Automate would be the way that you automate those data entries to get into your data set. So that's just a quick example of what those 2 things can be used for, but they obviously have a lot more power than that as well, can do a lot of things. And so getting back to Power BI, this is really, at the end of the day, the tool that brings your analytics to the end user in a customized way, and in a way that they can interact with on their own to figure out their answers to their own questions without having to go off and ask someone through a data request, or through anything more than just clicking a link and interacting with the data. Now, what you see down here in this little diagram here is Common Data Service, Data Connectors, AI Builder. These are just tool sets that are a part of the Power Platform offerings. So for example, Common Data Service, which is now known as the Metaverse, is really just the storage location of all of your Office 365 data. So for example, if I wanted my job title and the room I work in, that might be stored in my Microsoft profile, but it can be queried through the Metaverse into a Power App, or into Power Automate, or into Power BI. Data connectors, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, which are specifically more about the actual connections of the data to the content. So a gateway that allows you to sync data between the cloud and on premises would be an example of this. And then the AI Builder is really just adding machine learning really to these Power Platform offerings. So again, just sort of talks about this, that it's a software as a service offering, and it really gives us power to create our own visualizations in a customized way. So just getting into the capabilities of Power BI in a second, but first I just want to explain how Power BI actually works. So I've showed you what Power BI desktop looks like. That was our first demo. And that's sort of the developer mode. It's where you go to create the content. It's where you bring your data in. And at the end of the day, it's where you will publish that content to the Power BI service. The Power BI service is really a cloud space that stores all the content needed for the reports to be rendered. This can be many different workspaces, as they're called. It can be one workspace, and you're able to put whatever content you want into that workspace as needed, and organize it as you need to as well. So, with tabular reporting, often organizations will have their own report server, or would have their own report server back in the day. back in the day being like 4 or 5 years ago. So, but anyways, they would have a report server which has different file folders for different specific reports. So if you think about it like a manufacturing organization, just as an example, the manufacturing organization would have customer order lines or not lines, customer order information in one folder. They might have sales information in another. They might have manufacturing control information in another folder. We can do the same thing by project with our workspaces. So we could have a project or a workspace for a specific project. We could have a workspace for our department. We can have a workspace. Basically, it allows us to create the hierarchy that we need for our organization, which is the whole point of keeping it as flexible as possible. So you've published your content to the Power BI service, but where does the data sync to, or how does that data stay live? That's one key piece of reporting in general. And with tabular reports, you'd usually have a VPN connection, or you would have to be on premises to run some of those reports because they're connected to an on-premises database. Now, if we have the same setup in this instance, we actually are going to be connecting our organization data to a gateway, which is an encrypted connection on a separate server from where the database is actually located that you're connecting to, that allows you to run queries into your organization's server from the cloud. And again, it's encrypted, it's safe, and it keeps malicious actors away from your data and any information on your organization. So that is a huge way to allow your organization to push content, push data sets that are actually coming from local servers, local drives, into the Power BI service. It takes some time sometimes to set up, but once you've got gateways, once you've got your gateway set up, the gateway infrastructure, sorry, I should say set up, you can go ahead and create gateways pretty quickly and pretty easily to hit, whether it's a SQL database locally or a file folder locally, to get the data that you need and sync it between the report that you've published and the local data source. Now you can also connect to cloud sources, and this allows, because it's already in the cloud, if you're connecting to, say, an API, sort of like we did with the COVID-19 data, I could connect that to an API with a flow that has an ETL process that moves that data into Power BI. And I can make that into a Power BI data set, which can be refreshed live whenever we want to. Power BI gateways can also be refreshed live whenever we want to, but the cloud, it's already there. You don't have to worry about creating a gateway connection for it. It just allows you to connect directly to it. Now, that's not always the case. There's some instances where, like, if you're trying to connect to an Amazon container from Microsoft, you might have to create a data gateway, but by and large, that's the way that these data sets are connected and how they interact with the cloud, which takes us to the end user, who is accessing the report from the Power BI service, the cloud instance, and they are able to do their own customized analytics on that report. So as we've mentioned above, there are sort of 4 different types of reporting, and now specific to Power BI, we have tabular reporting, interactive dashboard reporting, as we've talked here, or web applications that Power BI reports generally fall into. Now, the interactive dashboard reporting is certainly the most often used, I would say, or at least by Power BI developers. And these often contain a mix of live visualizations and tables that respond to the user action and allows the user to customize their analysis in a way that tabular reports just can't do. And the efficiency gain from that is huge, both on the end user end, and as well as for the developer, and it's also an efficiency gain on the server level as well, which I'll explain in just a second. And to just give some context to what the web application is referring to here, you can use Power BI and Power Apps, anything in Power Platform, to create Power BI, what are called Power BI applications. Essentially, it's not the full scale of what you would get on a custom built website, but essentially it gives you a lot of the functionality and feel of what a fully built website would have, with all of the data that's powering it, and with the full interactive ability of what you would normally see in an HTML web page or a .NET web page or anything like that. The advantage, though, to doing the web application as a Power BI application versus doing a custom web application is usually time. It certainly is limited what you can do with the Power BI applications compared to a custom .NET app. But if time is a factor, then it may be better to use Power BI. So there's some key limitations with it, but at the end of the day, you have a lot of options with what you can do with Power BI and what content it can create. At the end of the day, they provide a tailored experience for the end user, though, which is really the end goal of Power BI, is to make it easier for the developer and make it easier, and not only easier, but also make it better for the end user to be able to get answers to their questions that they have. So I just want to quickly take a step back and talk about the Power BI development process just a little bit, at least the process that we have for developing Power BI reports. I won't go into too much detail because obviously there's a lot here, but I just wanted to give sort of a high level view of how we develop our reports. Now, starting out, we have a request for a report. The first question we have is this data a SQL report, or is this data coming from SQL, which would mean it's in an on-premises SQL database for us. And if not, then we need, then if it can't be imported into SQL, a SQL database, then a custom development solution is needed, which is just to say that we need more discussion. It's not that it makes it automatically more complicated or anything like that. It's just to say it needs more discussion, and we'll figure out a different way to achieve the goal. And once we've got that, so let's say we've got past that where we've got a SQL data source. The next piece is to basically clean our data, set up our queries, make sure our data set is good to go. Then we're going to ask ourselves, is there a PHI involved, which we'll talk a little bit about in a second. And if so, then we have to make all efforts to mask the data, exclude it, suppress the values, categorize it in a way that it's no longer physically identifiable. And once we've done that, we can connect our report to the source and query the data into Power BI to create the Power BI data set. And once we've done that, we develop our report and we publish that to a development workspace, and then set up a gateway if that's needed. If a gateway is not needed, and this is publicly available data that we can just connect directly to in the cloud, then we don't need to, and we can just continue on. If not, or if we do need a gateway, we have to go to IT and work with them to set up the gateway and test that out. Once all of that's been tested and everything works, we test everything, do the same thing, test it in production now. And then once that's tested and QC'd, once that's tested, then we do a final QC of the report and share to all the end users and let them know it's live in production to work with. So again, just a brief sort of explanation of what our process is for development. So what are the implications that all of this? The main one, the first and main one, is that interactive reporting, as we've referred to earlier, it allows for more time for developers, programmers, statisticians, or even project managers. Anyone on your team, it allows more time for them to spend on other work. And one of the keys here is that a Power BI report, an interactive one especially, can often replace multiple other static reports, which means that you don't have statisticians, programmers, developers working on those other reports, and you don't have which frees them up to work on perhaps more complicated or complex work items. One of the other implications is that we can set this up to refresh on a schedule, to trigger a refresh at a certain time. With our gateway connection, we can do a lot of configuration to refresh data to make sure that people are working with the most live data that's possible. The interactive reports, they also allow the end user really a different experience than they would have with a tabular report or any other type of report, because they're really interacting with it, similar to they might be interacting if they have. We work with a lot of people who sometimes, and including myself, will I want to look at it in Excel. Okay, so they just export to Excel, and they're doing a lot of manipulation, adding filters in Excel and looking at it in there. Where Power BI actually just gives you all of that in itself. You have, take the previous demo, for example, you have COVID-19 data there. You've got your matrices, which have the deaths and the daily case counts, and you're able to really drill in and filter as needed on the different fields. So you're really able to perform a more custom analysis, and it also allows multiple people to work on the same report. It's end users, that is, to look at the same report and generate a lot of different or answer a lot of different questions from the same report. And earlier I had mentioned as well that there was a server level efficiency gain, and that's because if we, as I said before, we replace 5 static reports with 1 Power BI report. So we have 5 reports that previously would have required a direct query onto the server. So you have 5 queries minimum. Say you have 10 people on each of those reports that work on each of those reports. You then multiply 10 times 5, you have 50 queries on the database, versus in a Power BI report, you just have 1 refreshing when it's needed. And then everybody has access to that most refreshed data. So at any given moment in time, you could have 50 people looking at your Power BI report with the most up-to-date data and only have to query the database once. So there's an added efficiency gain from that perspective too, because some of these reports servers, they can get overloaded with lots of processing, and so this reduces the amount of processing that's being done, and it separates it to where the report's being rendered in the Power BI service in the cloud, and the data set is being queried separately through a gateway connection. So the efficiency gain is all the way to the design of how Power BI works as well. So now let's just talk about some limitations here. Now, some of these are overall limitations. Some of these are specific to, as we mentioned before, public health research. Now, the first and main one it's not as necessarily common, but it does happen, and that is that there can be bugs from Microsoft. We had one last year where there was an issue with the user access groups that we worked with on the Power BI report, and so certain users were not able to get the report. But the good news is that Microsoft will work with you on that stuff because they don't want those bugs to exist any more than you do. So at the end of the day, although you are at the mercy of Microsoft for any changes or bugs that occur, you can usually work through them pretty quickly. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is report performance, where I just talked about tabular reports where they could have problems, not necessarily with the report itself, but with the processing that the report is doing. So if you have a tabular report that runs a complex query, it could take, let's say 30 seconds to run. Whereas in Power BI, you could have a query that it takes less time to run, but the report is still rendering because the report itself is too big. So that can be a problem where the complexity or size of the report is too much. Thinking about that COVID-19 example, we had multiple, I had started a page there real quick. Say we had 10 of those pages doing all geospatial visualizations on it. That would take up a lot of processing just in rendering the report itself, not in any queries on data. So whereas on a tabular report, you might have a problem with the actual data getting queried. Here, you might have a problem from a developer's perspective of a report getting slowed down by the fact that it's just too big. So that's one thing that developers have to keep in mind, but it's also something that end users should, in my opinion, tell their developers about report performance being poor so that it can be resolved. Now, the last two are sort of more specific to public health research, but the first one I think does really apply to everything, and that is that end user training can be a challenge, but I would also say it's an opportunity because the more people learn how to use this tool, the more that the tool will get used. So while some developers might not necessarily want to have to spend as much time training, it's an opportunity to make your content more relevant, make what you do more relevant. And I think that's an important distinction because at the end of the day, we want end users to be using the reports, and if they can't use them, then there's no point. So I know that it's different for every report, it's different for every audience, but pretty much any report that I come out with, there's some level of user training that we do, whether it's documentation, whether it's a seminar, but something to help the end users get familiar with what they're working with, because most people are really only familiar with working on tabular reports with table structured data. But in these views, it can be a little overwhelming. You can see all the cool stuff and be like, oh, that's cool, but I really don't know how to use it. And so you really need to make sure that you're bringing everyone along, and that everyone that has access to it can not only access it, but use it to its fullest abilities. And then the final limitation that we'll talk about is PHI and data privacy. I imagine that most people listening have had to work with PHI and consider HIPAA as a constraint. Internally, we're still working on our on our standards for how we work with PHI and Power BI reports. So right now, we mainly only do counts. We don't put patient level data, but based on what your infrastructure is, based on what your internal controls and what your internal documentation and procedures say, it can be done. Again, you just need to have everything set up correctly have the infrastructure and documentation around it to support it. Because as we all know, working with protected health information, it can be challenging, but ultimately it's our duty to protect patients' rights or participants' rights as well. So that's another consideration that you have to, based on your organization, figure out what your procedures are there. So before going to our final example, I just wanted to give a little bit of an explanation of sort of what our infrastructure is and how we administrate all these things. And when I say we, I mean BU ADRC actually. They administrate pretty much all of the infrastructure that we're talking about. And although they provide technical support, they are really the functional business unit, which helps us build all the infrastructure for our projects and for any of these reports, dashboards that we come out with. Almost every project requires some level of coordination between us and IS&T. And specifically for me, as a developer, as a Power BI developer, almost every report I do requires some work with IS&T to, whether it's to create a workspace or to create a data gateway. They help administer that. And at the end of the day, we configure and manage our workspaces, data sets, reports, and dashboards, but they administrate the workspaces themselves, the gateways, and other Power Platform infrastructure, among the other software and hardware that they manage. So now we'll just take before I finish up here, a final look at this example, which is it's all simulated data that you're seeing here. And it should not be used to draw any conclusions on the ADRC or on referrals at all. So it may have conflicting or contradictory values as well, but try to ignore the values as being, if there is a contradiction in the values, just try to ignore that and focus on the functionality that we're talking about. So this report, again, it's using random numbers, but it's modified from a report which is used to facilitate referral and recruitment of study participants, as well as provide a status dashboard for referrals and recruitment, which is one of the key aims of the ADRC. So if you can imagine from the end user perspective coming into this report as an investigator, you might be looking at one particular study that you want to get a status update on. So we click on study A, and we're able to interact with we're able to see the filtered table over here for the statuses and the count of participants with that status. But one of the beauties of Power BI is that we're able to put all of these different filters on the page, and we're able to use them at the same time. So say I want to define what cohort whether someone is in this particular cohort, which is a subgrouping of our study. So the RHI cohort, if they're in it, we want to say yes. And then let's say we also want a participant that's a part of study C. So we are able to see both of those things, the yes on RHI cohort and the study name selected at C, and see the values for the statuses here. But we're also able to see over here on the left the demographic breakdown of that selected, those selected filters, excuse me. So we see the race breakdown, the sex breakdown, the status breakdown for everyone that's in study C that we have data on. Now you might also ask, I only want to see it in a particular time frame. So right now we are only showing the last 2 years, but what if I want to show actually just the last year? So now we can change that filter to be a year to a year, or sorry, a year back from the end date. And you'll notice that the numbers have changed here as well. So you're really able to drill in, have multiple filters done at once, where, you know, on a tabular report, you'd probably have to download it into Excel, create a pivot table, make sure that the pivot table is actually displaying correctly, and then set all your filters back and forth. But here it's all done for you. It's all right there. So you're able to perform your own analysis, and you can imagine that, you know, this is a relatively simple example, but as you want to get more complex with it, you can put a lot of different filters on here that allow you to see data with different filters, but also you could have, this is just a simple table, but we could have that table contain 15 fields, and use the filters to filter down on those 15 fields. And then this is the last thing that I'll show you on this report. One of the nice parts about it is you can save all your filters here, and then you can export the data in this table, which if that example I just gave was true, you'd be taking out a basically what would be a tabular report after doing your filters. So here I can actually export the data with its current layout in Excel format and just go pull it open, look at it there. Or if I want to send that filtered view to others, then I can download it and share it to others as well. So there's really a lot that you can do, and this is just sort of scratching the surface of what Power BI does. And let me just get back to the presentation piece. And so that's, so that's all we have. And I see, I think we've got a question or two in there. I don't know if we can fit it in.
We've got a question from Alice, actually, who asks, in your experience, how long does it take to set up a report if the data source is an SQL database?
Great question. So the report itself is not I'd say it can take, to get a development version that you'll then go to the client and go over back and forth with them on. I'd say it can take anywhere from a day to a few days. And then once you've got that first view up, you work with the client and get it to a point where it's ready to be published. But much of the hard part is the actual working with the data before it comes into Power BI. Is that all we had? That is the only current question, but if anybody has any other questions they'd like to post, please feel free. We do have a minute or two left. Okay. I'll add that I think one of the things that we've seen is we've kind of in beginning to roll out and integrate some of these dashboards. We've kind of considered a lot of the requests that we typically receive and try to think about the users and how we can kind of maximize the user experience and get at as many of these questions that are typically asked in as few dashboards constructed as efficiently as possible, so that we can kind of address a lot of the requests that we know that we'll expect in terms of supporting things like grant development, monitoring progress, monitoring things like enrollment referral, monitoring the things that really are core essential functions of all the cores in the ADRC. Yep. Perfect. So I think that's everything for today. If I can send my email out to everyone, if there's any specific questions, you can all reach out. But thank you for the time, everyone.